Just like Feni did for grapevine trunk diseases, I will illustrate what growers do in the European viticultural regions to control Flavescence Dorée. I combined together different materials that I also borrowed from Fanny and Christina Diklic, so respectively French and Croatian.
Ma intanto diciamo subito che da questa indagine.
Let's clarify right away that this survey we carried with growers where we were supposed to also look for possible innovations, despite the fact that they may have not been proven or tested, not much has cropped up, not many innovations. The pillars are still the ones that François Michel illustrated a few moments ago, with the elimination of the foci and the elimination of the vectors, the carriers. The efforts will have to focus on being very accurate in implementing these pillars, particularly deciding on what products to use, the timing and the timeliness of the monitoring actions. There is a possibility, at least in theory, to induce more resistance in the vines. There are experiments on this underway, but there are also growers who've tested some solutions of their own, chemicals, biological solutions, and certain have reported some level of satisfaction, others haven't, so we are still in the field of speculation. Here's the overall picture of the practices implemented in the various regions. As you can see, there's a certain level of homogeneousness. Not everywhere can we convince people that they should systematically uproot the vines. Also because sometimes symptoms are not very clear. There might be different symptoms which may not be all present at the same time. And so if you don't know the signs and symptoms perfectly, you tend not to uproot. There's hot water treatment that's being used in nurseries, but it is still much debated. In Piedmont, where I live, and in southwestern France, it's a prevalent practice, while elsewhere, not at all. The treatments against the vector take 2 to 3 sprayings and treatments where Flavescence Dorée is present. There are a few exceptions and differences. Sometimes the first 2 treatments are sprayed also keeping into consideration the diapause and the hatching of the eggs is not happening all at the same time. So you sort of stagger the sprayings in order to take all the individuals. Then there are other treatments that you do against the young insects and others with adult insects. It all depends on the viticultural situation too, because where viticulture is intensive, Flavescence is controlled more effectively, and so the treatments against adults are not so important, while where you have uncultivated plots and have wild vines and there's a return of infected insects from the uncultivated plots to the vineyards, there's a risk. And even if the populations of Scaphadea titanus are very low, as we measure them via the traps. Even if that is the case, then there's still a risk, and most of the insects are infected. Even with very low populations, there's a high risk of infecting the entire vineyard. These are particularly complex situations for people who work on organic farming and viticulture, where products are not authorized everywhere, such as pyrethrum products. They are effective, but not so effective against the young, and even less so with adults, individuals. Also because these insects fly. They can fly, so they will get in and out of the vineyard, and the pyrethrum, which has a low resistance, has a limited effectiveness. So wherever you have uncultivated areas, it's very hard to counter Flavescence Dorée using organic farming practices. Christina Diclich draw this. It has to do with the activities in areas where Flavescence is not yet present. And this is a warning that I am giving to you for colleagues who live in areas where Flavescence Dorée has not spread yet, luckily, part of central Italy and the south of the country, because it's very important to take early action when you need to start fighting against the disease as soon as you start seeing the first few cases. Because if you recognize the disease immediately and if you fight it timely, then it is pretty easy to control it. But if the epidemic begins, it can be really a big problem. We in Piedmont, we were late in recognizing the disease and taking measures against it. It made it to our part of the country towards the late 1990s, and that caused many problems, because in Piedmont, in many areas, people had no longer carried out any insecticide sprayings or pesticide sprayings, so people were not equipped for that. So the presence of a few infected vines from nurseries created epidemics. We have uprooted over 5,000 hectares of Flavescence Dorée struck vineyards, and if you don't have the disease yet, be aware it might get to your part of the world, and you need to take early action. You need to control the vector. You need to see if the insect is there. If it is, you need to be alert, particularly in areas that border on regions where the disease is present already. And it's appropriate to control these carrier populations, sometimes even simply synchronizing sprayings that you do for other insects, using agents and with timings that can also at least partially control Scaphidaeus populations. This is partially done where Flavescence is not present. The knowledge of the disease and of the symptoms tends to be scarce. That's self-evident. So it's up to you to improve that level of knowledge, and we will assist in that, because we are preparing a number of dissemination resources that will be soon made available. Videos, seminars for farmers and development consultants, and we'll try to bring that to areas where Flavescence Dorée is not a problem yet. Okay, I have to speed up. This is a summary of what is being done. Monitoring is important. It's important to recognize the symptoms that by now everybody should know. Symptoms on the leaves, and in case of doubt, you should take the leaves or the symptomatic parts of the plant to the local centers so that they can be analyzed to see if it's Flavescence Dorée or Bois Noir, because almost everywhere where they have no Flavescence Dorée, they have Bois Noir, such as in the Marques or Abruzzi or Sicily. So this can create some degree of confusion, and therefore it is important to routinely check for the disease again. Even if you think it's a bois noir, it's always a good idea to go through the tests again to make sure it's really not Flavescence Dorée. Something else to keep in mind, this is a social disease in a way, because its capacity to spread and make serious damage and cause serious damage is tied to the type of viticulture that is practiced in that particular region. Now, to make a long story short, where growers have a good income, where there are young people who work in agriculture, where there are no abandoned plots, where all the plots are cultivated, people know well, there is a good consulting services network. Flavescence may exist, but it's generally well controlled. François Michel was talking about collective monitoring and collective control. That also requires some level of team spirit on the part of growers, and our role as consultants is to stretch beyond our role and create motivation to work as a team and to exchange knowledge and information. The role of the local authorities is all important. Mayors can be very excellent allies in order to convince people, even without getting to the level of sanctions and compulsory measures, compulsory enforcements. That can be very important. Here's one of the various plots where our researchers, Marzocchi and Bosco, studied the relationship between the uncultivated plots and the vineyards. This is a particularly critical site, but the problem tends to be pretty serious everywhere. The proportion of Staphylococcus infection is pretty high both in and out of the vineyard, so that makes us think that there is a continuous interrelation between these two environments, and that explains why it is important to also take action where there are no vineyards and not just on the vineyards, although this may be difficult because sometimes people don't even know who owns these plots any longer, so you need to go look for some elderly in some faraway farm. But it's very important to attempt to eradicate these foci where wild grapevines grow. We've learned how to do that. We're reasonably good at taking care of that. You need to destroy these wild vines, American vines that come from the rootstocks that have been abandoned. But you need to take caution to do that, taking care not to disturb the insect, because otherwise it will fly to another place, typically a vineyard, spreading the disease. It's very important to monitor the juvenile forms. That's generally done by specialized staff to define when's the best time for the first treatment. You can seek to implement other tools such as biological indicators, traps, and so forth, but it's always essential to detect the signs by checking the leaves. Monitoring is easier with adult individuals. If you find you can do that using yellow traps, and the growers can do that themselves. It's not so difficult to identify a Staphylococcus, so you just need to enjoy good eyesight. Also, with symptomatic vines, you need to uproot them very quickly and very accurately. When the first symptoms appear in the vineyard, you have an obligation to cut the vine, but you need to do that as soon as possible. because we know that the symptomatic parts of the canopy are the parts that will pass the phytoplasm to the carrier, the vector. So the shorter the time they spend in the vineyard, the lower the risk that the infection may propagate. If the plant is not immediately uprooted, that's not such a problem, but the symptomatic part of the canopy needs to be done right there and then. And it has to be done specifically. It doesn't have to be an occasional practice. You have to go there to do that on a systematic basis. You need to look for these symptoms. By midsummer, you need to go to walk through the vineyards and see what you need to cut from the vines, and then you can also uproot them, but later on. And this is already being done in several regions. What do nurserymen do? Well, hot water treatment is in use in some regions, not in others, based on our experience in Piedmont, but that's also the case in France, is that it is a pretty hard procedure, but if done well, it will not compromise the vines. It will just delay budding, bud break, and it is very effective in destroying the phytoplasms. And also an alternative is to grow the mother stalks and make the scions and the root stalks in regions that are free from Flavescence Dorée. And then you can also use trichoderma. They are starting to use trichoderma-based products also in the nurseries, and we're starting to see scientific evidence that this works. This fungus seems to be effective against it. Okay, I'll just skip this. We've discussed this already.
L'utilizzo di barbatelle che hanno subito il trattamento in acqua.
Heat-treated cuttings need to be used in where Flavescence Dorée already exists, because wherever the disease exists, it is more important to use healthy plants, but even more so where the disease does not exist. Scaphoideus spreads the disease a lot more effectively than any nursery, but this is even more important to do so when you don't have the diseases, not to start an epidemic. Elicitors, biocontrol, and biostimulant agents are being tested. This is not regarded as a way to fight and control the disease, but it's just a possibility. This might bring about less seriousness in the symptoms displayed by the plant, and not the whole control of the disease. This is just a theoretical possibility. Unfortunately, this has not been confirmed experimentally, although some growers state that they've seen good results. We hear them, but we have no scientific ways to confirm that. François Michel has discussed this. This is not implemented yet. Vibration mating disturbance involves high costs in terms of the deployment, and importantly, in the areas where you have uncultivated areas and where the disease is introduced from outside the vineyard, this will not fix the whole problem, because insects may mate elsewhere and then come back to the vineyard later. That's all with me. You need to refer to the knowledge reservoir. In a couple of weeks, we will contribute new materials. It's a live knowledge reservoir. We feed it with new contents all the time. Recently, there was a conference in Alba, in Piedmont, on Flavescence Dorée, where innovations were presented, although none in the implementation stage, and also the videos of this conference will be soon made available 1 month, or at least at the end of the project, in the Wine Network Knowledge Reservoir. I'd like to thank all my colleagues and facilitators of the other regions. That's all with me. Thank you.